Hello everyone and welcome to the 101 session on cybersecurity, a walk through the layers of cyber and privacy protection for security systems. If you're here, it means that you have a question or two on cyber or data protection. Maybe you're wondering about what's up with the new regulatory frameworks. Maybe you're hoping for some guidance on what is now a truly universal concern, trying to make sense of the flood of sometimes conflicting information on these topics. So let's get right into it. I'm Laurent Villeneuve, Product Marketing Manager at Genetec for video management, appliances, and cybersecurity initiatives. I'm joined today by Mathieu Chevalier, Lead Security Architect at Genetec. Mathieu is responsible for everything that's related to cybersecurity within our product portfolio.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today.
So there's three main things you'll walk away with today's session. First is a better knowledge on the main pillars and best practices when it comes to securing a security system. And by the end of the session, you should also understand a little better why this is a core pillar for all of our products. And hopefully this will help you rationalize the massive amount of information on cybersecurity and privacy protection that's out there, and also make it more actionable for your organization. So of course, the first layer of risk directly affects your devices, right? So cyber attacks can result in leaked footage, physical breaches. Compromised edge devices can be the point of entry for highly disruptive ransomware attacks, for example. We've seen some currency mining using devices. So there's lots that can affect your environment at the device level. But then we can expand that to your network. So cyber attackers can use your devices to hijack your internet footprint, for example. There's also the rather common use of botnets. Those will flood the networks with requests using IoT devices. Those can be cameras. So this is commonly known as a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack. So we've seen a few of these attacks being actually launched from cameras. And then there's the private information that's within those systems, right? The intellectual property, the personal data of customers, sensitive information on the business, even evidence that can be stolen through those attacks. But then what about everybody else? What's at stake here is not only your infrastructure, your data, or your people. Your security system could be used as a point of entry and have a much broader impact to a lot of people. So everything is interconnected. Any device could be used as a point of entry. And even if they don't target your business directly, attackers can use your network to get into critical networks or infrastructure. So the fact here is that people who do not do their due diligence or evaluate that impact properly, they could be liable for negligence. So this entire conversation, the cybersecurity conversation, is all about risk. The approach should be very similar to a standard conversation that we have about physical security. So those cybersecurity and physical security really go hand in hand. So people need to assess the level of risk for their organization coming from the outside or the inside, and then work with trusted vendors to figure out where to add every layer of defense. So if we're looking at the risk, the mitigation of the risk, what we're doing here is that we actually, as a security provider, help our customers evaluate the level of risk that's implied within those systems, and then properly mitigate that risk, right? And the equation here is a very simple one. It's the probability of something bad happening times the impact of that bad thing happening. So if you're going to put security equipment on your network, it's because you believe they will not harm your organization. So we're seeing that the central portion, the probability of something bad happening, a cyber attack, has skyrocketed in the last few years. So with all the recent data breaches affecting tech giants and some events that recently happened where customers will highly question the level of transparency of businesses and whether or not their data is safe. Also, combined with the fact that attackers are much more sophisticated and organized than ever before. So the surface of attack is very wide and expanding. So in order to mitigate that risk, we need to first look at the different cybersecurity concepts that are out there and how we actually apply them into security systems. So let's have a look at those main concepts before adding it to security deployments. Mathieu?
Yes, thank you, Laurent. So here you see the typical components of a security system. In order to see how those components are secure, we'll first go through all the layers and best practices for a typical deployment, and then come back to this specific slide or graphic to see how those get together. When it comes to protecting a physical security system, protecting the data exchange and stored within those systems, there are three main categories that we need to look at. The first categories is called authentication. In any surveillance system, this is the first step that entities have to go in order to interact with the system. Authentication determines whether an entity is who they claims to be. For instance, in the case of an individual, it's usually based on the username and password combination. The goal of it is to prevent unauthorized access by providing it only to known entities for which their entity will be verified. And those entities can be users, servers, workstation, or websites. So why using authentication? To make sure that only the right people have access to the system resources. More specifically, it protects against someone impersonating a legitimate user, either directly or by conducting a man-in-the-middle attack. So what is this man-in-the-middle attack concept? The idea is that you can have two different kind of attack that way. The first one is only listening to the network. So this is like in the old days when, parents were picking up the phones to listen to the conversation of their children. Same idea here. This is considered a passive approach because in this scenario, the data is only being listened to, but is not modified directly. Now, if you add in the mix modification of the data in real time, this becomes an active man-in-the-middle attack. In this second case, not only the data is monitored, but the attacker can also modify the data in real time, temper it, change it, provide false information, or just steal the data. So in order to avoid this situation, we need to apply authentication and authorization method. Let's see what authentication method we can have. So for the first one, we call it claim-based authentication. When you request access to a system, you can use what is called a claim in order to access it. A claim is a statement that one subject makes about itself or other subject. The statement can be about a name, an identity, a key, a group, a privilege, or even a capabilities. Those claims are sent to the network and represents the identity of the person sending it. Now, this is useful in more of decentralized system where you don't necessarily have access to a database where username and password will be stored all the time for all entities. Now, let's look at another way of doing it, which is called certificate authentication. First, what is a certificate? A certificate is an electronic credential that is used to assert the identities of entities on a network. It is similar to an ID card if you want, so like a passport of a driver license, but more electronics. In its starts, it contains a public key and the list and lists the identity of the owner. Now there are two broad types of different certificate. The first one is called self-signed certificate. So in that scenario, the certificate is not trusted by or is not linked by other certificate, but is rather linked within itself. If an evil entity is in this scenario, it would be able to fake the certificate and exchange it with another one. In the second scenario, you have a trusted certificate, which is signed by somebody else, a trusted authorities. This allows to verify the identity of the known certificate and make sure it's the right one and not one that has been tampered with. So similar to what Microsoft is doing with its Office 365, it's possible to use passive authentication within a security product, like Security Center, for example. This had another layer of security and hacked with external identity provider. So, for example, it could be Microsoft Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS. This allows you to manage your identity in a central way in your Active Directory, for example. And this would also allows you to use multi-factor authentication. So in this scenario, you enter your password in the system. You will then get a notification from your smartphone. And if you acknowledge it on your phone, then you will be granted access to the system. Now, let's go over some essential password protection methods. Those are pretty basics, but it's all good to have them laid out. So the first one, maybe the obvious one, change default password. So most cameras are shipped with default administrative passwords. It is not recommended to use those default passwords because they are well known, right? So the easiest way you can do to improve your physical security system is to avoid using default passwords. Next one, use strong passwords. So that's all and fine that you change your default password, but what do you change it with? The idea here is to use a password that will be hard to guess. So they are typically composition rules based on the length and on what kind of a character set that you use in order to set a passwords. Those are good rules to follow. Next one is using a password manager. Now, it's not a good practice today to write down passwords on a piece of paper. And it's not a good practice to reuse the same password everywhere. So how do you manage that? With a password manager. The idea here is you can get a system that will manage those passwords for you in a secure way. There are many password managers out there. They work great. Just make sure to at least use one. Now, rotating your passwords. Having strong and managed password is great, but the idea is that you want to rotate them on a regular basis. So if they get leaked somehow, then the attacker will have only a reduced window of opportunity. Finally, protect against brute force attack. So for online system, like a VMS system, hackers will get in by trying out multiple passwords and being lucky somehow and finding the right one. So the idea here is that you want to have a system that detects those kinds of brute force techniques and protect against them.
All right, so now let's move on to another layer of protection within a security system, which is called authorization. So this is another essential layer. It's absolutely needed to control who has access to what, right? So what users in the system or entities can actually see or what they can do once they are authenticated to the system. So the objective is to define the access rights that someone has over a set of resources, such as private data, computing resources, or a specific application. So there's two authorization layers you can work on within a security system. There's user management and partitions. So within our platform, we have a very similar approach, just the way files are managed on a hard drive. So you can create a local partition so that the data is stored on those partitions and separated from the data found on another partition on the same physical disk. So again, an authorized user is a user who can see who has the right to access certain entities contained in the partition. So those users can only exercise their privileges on entities they can actually see. So in Security Center, in our platform, you can really deep dive onto what exactly each operator or certain role can do or cannot do. So there's 388 settings that will actually affect the daily interactions for the operator with the system. And the third core cybersecurity capability here is encryption. So why would anyone use encryption? Well, this ensures the privacy and the protection of your data. It secures intellectual property or any data that is processed or collected in your system. It doesn't prevent individuals from accessing the data and doesn't guarantee the authenticity of the message, so who's sending it. It's kind of like putting a lock on the door. You don't control who has access just by putting that lock, but you gave the key to the right person, right? Thanks to the step one that Mathieu talked about, authentication. So you need to make sure that you properly encrypt your data to fully secure your system. So within a security system, there's many methods and places where you can encrypt video as well as other types of data within that system. So first one is encryption of video in transit, meaning while the data is traveling. This is activated by default actually now in our security platform. And then you can encrypt that same video at rest, right? So when it is stored, when the data sits in the server. And we can also encrypt the communications and the databases. So the communications channel, as best practice, should also be encrypted. Then you can protect your metadata or your multimedia data, let's say video, audio, and so on, both at rest and in transit. And finally, you can use blurring and masking to further protect information within the video stream. So you see all of these layers actually work with each other within a security system or within a VMS. So if we talk specifically about video management, typically you're looking at two channels, the video channel, the RTP, and this first channel is to stream video images. And the second channel is RTSP. So in a security installation, it takes care of command and control of cameras, for example. So what can we do to add security to those two channels? Well, the problem with RTP is that the packets can be easily captured by a packet sniffer on the network and then rebuilt. So that will put in jeopardy the privacy of your videos. So this is where SRTP comes into play. So you can use that secure real-time protocol to fully encrypt the media handled by RTP, which is then protecting your video streams from snoopers. So this will be supported with our platinum partners within our Security Center platform. And then what about command and control security? So we also need to protect the command and control stream, the RTSP. So for that, we'll use TLS, the transport layer security. This is a cryptographic protocol. It's very similar to the one used on the web when an HTTP website becomes HTTPS. So here, RTSP becomes RTSPS. So once you're done thinking about cybersecurity, those first three core pillars, you also need to think about how to safeguard the privacy of the data, the privacy of people who have their information collected within those systems. Because most of the data that we use, transmit, and store within those platforms, this is sensitive data. It needs to be handled with care, with confidentiality protected at all times. So a good security system should not make you do any compromise between security and privacy protection. So let's go through a few capabilities to fully protect the privacy of individuals. So a core component before applying masking or redaction measures is adding ways to survey your system and verify the information that is recorded and what needs to be in there. So this is what we call personal data and identity management. So centralizing the identity makes it much easier to protect that data and also to answer requests for information or requests to be forgotten, which is part of those new privacy protection frameworks. So this kind of capability is becoming essential in a security system. It just gives you much more visibility and control on the data that you're collecting. Another essential component, we were talking about having better control. Authentication, we already talked about that concept. This is probably one of the most important layers of protection to ensure data privacy, right? Embedded authorization capabilities also allows you to restrict the scope of activity within your system. So this is all about giving us access rights only to the people who need to have access to those things, and properly define what users can do with these resources, because those users should only have access to personal data when it is necessary for their day-to-day tasks. So again, you can manage groups or individuals who have access then to servers, workstations, websites, or applications, for example. The third layer here, which is another essential one for real-time privacy protection, is dynamic video anonymization. This is to maintain the privacy of individuals within the view of your surveillance cameras. So the operators here will only see what they need to see. So this is a module within our platform that we can add on top of any existing cameras. It can be used indoors and outdoors. And you can fully customize the way you wish to anonymize people. You can use blurring, pixelization, or fully opaque masks. So this is for live and recorded video, and you can apply the 4I principle for those more stringent regulations. And in a typical security incident workflow, the last final step is usually sharing video evidence, right? So exporting on a USB stick or burning it on a DVD is no longer acceptable. There's often a clear requirement by many privacy regulations to do this via a secure cloud portal. So we provided a solution to send the exported file directly in the cloud in the secure portal, where from there you can share and collaborate on cases on this evidence. So all the movements of that file, that video file, can be audited. You can fully preserve the chain of custody from your main security platform all the way to this evidence management platform. And on top of that, you can redact or blur out the faces on this video evidence for any witness or bystanders in the scene. And of course, all of that data is fully encrypted. So all of this is nothing if there's no way of hardening or maintaining the security deployments. So let's see what we have in that department. Mathieu?
Yes, thank you, Laurent. So let's start with the maintenance aspect. Conducting self-assessment on your system health is great. But when you're struggling and juggling with many tasks, it's easy to push them aside for another day. Instead, depending on the system you have, you might be able to access tools designed to simplify these day-to-day maintenance tasks. So if you were a Genetec Security Center customer, for example, you have multiple tools. Three of those are shown here at the screen. The first one is called the System Availability Monitor, or the SAM. This keeps watch over the status of your Genetec system components and alerts you if things like devices are falling offline. The second one is called the Genetec Updater Service. This informs you when new products, updates, and camera firmwares are available and when they apply to your system, so that you can act on it and apply it in a timely fashion. The last one is the Security Score widget, which helps you track in real time the security status of your system and follow recommendation to improve your score. So we'll look at those three more in detail. So the security score is a widget that is found in the dashboard. It is a pre-configured one that helps you track your compliance with the Security Center hardening guide. This basically will check in real time if you have implemented the recommendation or not in your system. And so it will give you a score based on this. The next one is the firmware vault, that is built on top of the Genetec Updater service. This allows you to track camera firmwares. This will let you see if new firmwares are available through the hardware inventory report. With the firmware vault, you also get the ability to download the firmware and push it to the cameras directly, speeding up the maintenance and closing the gap faster. The firmware vault support camera from Axis, Bosch, Angwa, and Panasonic currently. Now, with Security Center 5.7, we also have the Privilege Troubleshooter. This allows you to examine the rights of entities in the system in a more detailed and pinpointed way. Instead of going through a long list of permission for a given user group, you can now look at who has access to any given and specific entity, and it also allows you to perform specific action. This helps stay on top of temporary privilege that have become permanent, therefore reducing your exposure to it. Now remember the graphic I showed you at the beginning? Well, let's look at it again. We're gonna look at it at an end-to-end security from edge devices to client interface, and see how we can secure those components. So if we start from the edge devices, we add a layer of security on the data in transit. Then at the core of the system, the video archive are fully encrypted using the AES protocol with the 128-bit key. The keys are are generated with uniquely and randomly, and they are automatically generated. Then again, from the core of the client interface, the communications are always encrypted. At the client interface level, there is claim-based identity framework. We are implementing multi-factor authentication there as well. Within this framework, you can differentiate various users. Next, password policies, permissions, and privilege can also be enforced, as well as audit trail to keep track of system activity. we can go further into a hybrid deployment with cloud storage, where video is encrypted as well. Best practices for centralized architecture is to create a custom user to access remote sites. Then, after this, we're going to ensure everything is secure and up to date with automated software and firmware maintenance with the help of embedded tools like I showed you, or through client certification when an upgrade is necessary. So here are the main drivers of Genetec. Cybersecurity is infused in our product development. It is a constant evolution of our portfolio, adding new layers of protection at every release. Now, we keep up with evolving industry, and Invrig contributes to new certification to help customer comply and give them a peace of mind. All of this would be useless if the deployments are not actually up to date. So our connected devices streamline maintenance and help our customer keeps everything protected and up to date. We're constantly working on those tools and services to improve them. Cybersecurity and privacy protection by design is a must and is often required by regulations such as GDPR. So we are working to make them on by default. Shipping pre-hardened solution and applying cybersecurity features by default makes it more accessible to our customer. Further than that, we are implementing new tools and features to make the whole process hassle-free. We offer new capabilities that give visibility on the states of security deployment. Now, our responsibility as a security manufacturer is to help democratize cybersecurity and make it more easily usable and accessible for everyone. So here are the three main takeaways of this presentation. The best approach to mitigate cyber risk is a defense in depth strategy. So having multiple layers of defense to make sure to catch as much threat as possible. Cybersecurity and privacy protection, they go hand in hand together. And as a security manufacturer, we try to play a central role in securing the deployment of our customer and the industry, play a role in education as well. So on this, thank you for being with us for this session, and please don't hesitate to ask us any question. See you next time.
Thank you, Mathieu, and thanks everyone for attending. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.